Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Bobby Nash on. Bobby, tell the fans a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'm a writer. I write novels, comic books, audio dramas, screenplay. I'll write on a napkin if somebody's paying for it. But yeah, I started out as a comic fan, and my dream goal was to be a comic book artist. Turns out I'm not quite good enough to be a comic book artist, but I started writing comics and eventually sold one. Been writing comics off and on for almost 30 years now. Fantastic Four is, I'm a big Fantastic Four fan, which is part of why we're doing this.
So, when did you become a fan of the Fantastic Four?
I became a fan with the Byrne run, which is what we're going to talk about today. That's where I really started reading a lot of them. I had seen a couple of comics as a kid that were Fantastic Four books, and I remember the 70s cartoon and then reruns of the old 60s cartoon. So I knew who they were, but I didn't become a fan of the book until I was in middle school. I had moved, and the first guys I met at the new school, there was a group of 4 guys, and they were all comic readers. And I had never met anybody other than me that read comics. And they were introducing me. I was a Spider-Man fan. I knew Spider-Man, Superman, Batman. That was about it. And so they introduced me to things like Thor, the X-Men, Daredevil, and the Fantastic Four again. And that's where I started reading multiple issue stories and just fell in love with the run. And it was during the John Byrne era that I started reading it regularly. And I've since gone back and collected a lot of the old ones. I have a nice long run of like issue 29 up. They start getting a little more expensive. You get below 29, but I do have a 9. I have 9 is the lowest one I have. So yes, it's been well read though.
So, you decided to talk about the John Byrne run of Fantastic Four. What makes this run so special?
Like I said, this is where I fell in love. This is where I fell in love with the characters. I knew who they were, but this is where I got to know them as characters. Because watching the cartoons, they weren't deep. You just got, it's a story with these characters. Reading the books, I got to know the characters and just fell in love with it. I really came to love Byrne's storytelling. I really dig his art. And so it was just a fun book that I couldn't wait to read the next issue.
Byrne, as we all know, was doing the X-Men at the time
Mm-hmm.
he was drawing it.
It's Doctor Doom.
Yeah. Believe it or not, when I do edit for clarity, it'll knock all this out.
Yeah.
As Byrne was drawing the X-Men at the time with Claremont, but it wasn't, he didn't lead the X-Men for any particular reason. He was already slated to take
Mm-hmm.
over the Fantastic Four before he left the X-Men. Byrne had become a little frustrated with Claremont. As we know, Byrne has his own creative vision of wanting to
Yep.
write and draw, and Fantastic Four was really his big idea to make his own stories. I didn't realize this, but artist Bill Skynowitz, I hope I said that, was actually
Sienkiewicz.
Skivenich.
Yeah.
He was really going to draw the series, but
Because he was already doing the book. Bill Sienkiewicz was already drawing the book. Doug Munch was writing it. Yes, I've read that where Byrne was going to take over writing and Sienkiewicz was going to stay on as the art. And I'm not sure why that didn't happen. Maybe he was offered another book, or I know he went on to do the New Mutants, but I don't know if that timing syncs up. But Bill Sienkiewicz and Doug Munch had a very short run on the FF right before Byrne, which is it's a good run, but it was a very short run.
so Byrne took over with issue 232 and 81, and he did a pretty good run all the way through 86 with issue 295. There was a lot of highlights. You had a lot of cosmic stuff. The characters actually changed and grew and became something. To me, Bobby, it was like you could take everything that happened after Lee and Kirby, and it would almost picked up right where they took off.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you would think too? Also, I mean, you could do
Yeah.
everything between those two, and just it's a direct continuation of Kirby and Lee.
Yeah. So there's probably the reason his first issue where he was the main creator, because he did a 2-issue earlier that he wrote and drew. There was a fill-in that was actually written and drawn for Coca-Cola, and it was going to be a giveaway that then, for whatever reason, didn't happen. And so they made it 2 issues. But when he took over as writer and artist full time, the first story is called Back to Basics. And he was like, yeah, we're going to take the FF back to what they were when he was reading them. It could almost go right from Lee Kirby straight to Byrne, the way it was set up. And I like, too, his first handful of issues are basically standalone issues that are they're really just reintroducing the characters. Some of them were small stories, like he put Johnny in a murder mystery, which was unusual for that character. But he made it work, and he was doing a lot of sci-fi stories, which really works with the FF because for all their superpowers, the FF are not superheroes primarily. They are explorers. They are scientists. They're not like Spider-Man, who puts on a mask, goes out and patrols the city looking for crimes to stop. The FFs generally doesn't do that. They'll help if there's something needed, but they don't act like superheroes. They're not out patrolling, making sure banks aren't getting robbed and things like that.
Even though it's gone back to the Kirby and Lee era, it didn't stop the evolution of the characters because a
Mm.
lot of stuff happened with the characters. Sue became the Invisible Woman after being the
Yep.
Invisible Girl. You had Doctor Doom redefined in the middle of his run. You had the trial of Reed Richards, which also redefined Galactus. You had a really big status quo change. Then the She-Hulk became a member. It actually made you care for the first time about She-Hulk as a character.
I started liking She-Hulk a lot more. I was enjoying her in the Avengers right before that, but yeah, Byrne really had an affinity for her that made me really care about the She-Hulk. You mentioned Sue becoming the Invisible Woman instead of the Invisible Girl. He also was really good at giving Sue new uses for her power. She learned how to use it. Like, people thought she could fly suddenly because she had learned how to use it, like Iceman uses his ice slide, or using her power in different ways other than just to become invisible or to have a force field. And I thought he'd come up with some interesting ideas of how Sue's power worked.
So, what were some of the things that you really thought were great about the series that it still stands up literally decades later?
The Galactus storyline, where Galactus has come back to Earth with Terrax, and Terrax has lifted New York into the sky, and he wants the FF to kill Galactus, and that's where Frankie Ray becomes the Nova and the Herald of Galactus. There's a lot that happens in that story, and it's got one of those excellent covers, that Everybody versus Galactus cover. But that whole thing about we're fighting Galactus, Galactus is about to die. And then Reed makes the decision Galactus is not a villain, Galactus is a force of nature. We've got to save Galactus. And which then leads into, you mentioned the trial of Reed Richards, which is like leads into that later. All of these alien races who have been devastated by Galactus put Reed on trial because they consider him like the harbinger of death because he has put Galactus back out. But there's a lot of good stuff with Galactus. There's a great one where we see Galactus destroy the Skrull homeworld. As you said too, you mentioned Doctor Doom. There's a great issue. I forget the issue number, but the FF aren't in it. It's all about Doctor Doom, and we're in his castle, and we see the various sides of Doom. Because as much a villain as Doom is, there are things he does, like for the Latvians and things, the people in his country that he rules, where he really does seem to care about them. It kind of gives a little more sides to
So,
Doom.
so wouldn't you agree that a lot of what Byrne did decades later still ripples through into the Marvel mythos in big ways today? Like how Galactus is perceived, destroying the
Mm-hmm.
Skrull homeworld, a lot of the intergalactic stuff still ripples through a lot of the Marvel mythos today.
I would say that, yeah, because there was a. I don't think if he hadn't have done that, we might probably wouldn't have got the whole. What was it? The secret invasion, the Skrulls taking. There's also a story that happened with the Skrulls later in the run, late near the end of his run, where they crossed over with the Avengers in the annuals, and the Skrulls all get frozen in whatever form they're in at that moment, which is a good story. Later writers picked up on those threads and continued those stories. And so I think a lot of the stuff you get, yes, with Galactus and Doom goes back and forth from being sometimes a sympathetic villain to a mustache twirling villain, depending on who's writing the character. But I do that we've Yes, we've given more sides to Doom. And even Lee and Kirby did that too. We have different sides to who Doom is. But I think Byrne really stepped into that, especially showing how much not only does he take care of the people in Latveria, but we actually see that they love him for it. They don't see him as an oppressor keeping them down. They see him as the guy that keeps them safe, keeps food on the table, keeps the electricity running, that kind of stuff. So seeing those different sides of Doom, I think made Doom a more rounded character for me. He wasn't just the villain.
We're
But
talking
then,
about
but then when he was a villain, he did supremely villainous stuff.
how do you think he changed as a creator, as an artist? How does his art evolve over this run?
When he was doing the FF, he was inking himself, which was not something he was like on the X-Men. He and Terry Austin so worked together. So when he was on FF, there was a kind of simpler look to his art, I thought. Around the time when he was writing and drawing the Fantastic Four, he was also drawing the Avengers, and he was writing and drawing Alpha Flight. So he was doing 3 books a month, 2 of which he was writing and drawing. So I understand his technique was he didn't do full pencils. He would do layouts that would get approved, and then he would just go straight to inking the layouts, which works if you're inking yourself. I think he had an idea of what he wanted, and he could play to that. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed his early run where he was inking himself. I thought the art was great. Later, they started bringing in other inkers. Al Gordon, I know, inks for a while. Joe Sinnott comes in and inks for a while. Jerry Ordway inks for a while. And those were all good, but it gave a different feel to the books. The art was a little tighter, I think, when he had inkers. Not to say that's better. Like I said, I loved his early inking it himself phase. So it was a nice bit of just seeing the artist grow. Depending on who he was working with, you would get different types of layouts or different types of energy from the art. But I think his storytelling got better when he was writing and drawing. Sometimes when you're just doing art, you know, the artist doesn't always, you are a storyteller, but you're not always, ooh, this is a good idea. I want to do this because there's another person involved. And I think he was able to do things with the Fantastic Four that he might not have been able to do had somebody else been writing it.
So, is this true or in the close area that the reason why he left because he was having creative differences between him and editor in chief Jim Shooter?
I've also read there was an interview with him where, because he leaves the FF and goes and does Superman. When after Crisis, DC hired him to revamp Superman with the Man of Steel miniseries. As I understand it from interviews, Byrne did not intend to leave the Fantastic Four. He let his bosses know that they've invited me to come work on Superman, and I want to do that, but I'm committed to the Fantastic Four. And they were told, no, if you're leaving. Now, that's Byrne's. I never heard it from other people, but I know that was Byrne's version, was that he was told to go.
It's interesting because Byrne is such a massive creator. It's interesting to speculate had he had stayed on Fantastic
Yeah.
Four, what would have happened, or if he'd never done Superman over at
Mm-hmm.
DC. In both instances, you would have radically different narratives moving forward.
Yeah.
Correct?
On his website, he has a forum where he answers some of these questions. And he does have a thing on here were some of the things I had planned. Because apparently he was planned up past, he had like loose plots up past 300. Yeah. So he
95,
had,
95.
okay. So he had plans up past 300 that the storyline after he left, now they finished up based on his plots, that one storyline where they're in the bubble. And then the writers and artists that came in for the up to 300 and all, and the anniversary issue, those were not his plots. So his plans going forward kind of ended there with the bubble. So yeah, it's a shame. I would have loved to have seen him stick around longer. But yeah, he and Shooter, they reportedly butted heads, not just over this, the whole death of Jean Grey and the X-Men. what is one of those stories that's been told and retold where Jean would actually survive and just lose the power of the Phoenix, et cetera, et cetera. It was approved by editorial. They drew the book. And then at the last minute, Shooter goes, yeah, no, she's going to die. So they had to go back and rush and do a new ending and scrap the next issue and redo it because the whole next issue was about her re-entering her life, which then now became a funeral issue. But yeah, there's a lot of stories over the years of Byrne and Shooter butting heads. And Byrne has a bit of a reputation for when those things happen, he just leaves. His West Coast Avengers, the Hulk, those all kind of had short runs because of those type of disagreements. I would have loved to have seen him stay longer. I am a huge fan of his run.
So let's wrap this up. Any closing thoughts before we end this podcast on, again, one of my favorite runs is also John Byrne. That's why I jumped on the chance to talk about. And John Byrne, again, before we close and you get your closing thoughts, because John Byrne isn't in the limelight anymore, but back in the mid 80s, he was a very hot commodity. And a lot of newer fans just, who's John Byrne? If you're a newer fan, you really need to go back and look at some of the stuff John Byrne, not just with Fantastic Four, but some of the other things.
There's a lot of stuff making it into these movies that come from. I just saw Superman yesterday. There's a lot of John Byrne's Superman in that movie. There's a lot of stuff. The whole Lex Luthor as a businessman, that's a John Byrne, Marv Wolfman thing from when they rebooted the Superman mythos. But I would say if you love good sci-fi adventure stories, the Byrne run is there. They're not expensive. They have omnibuses, but I have them in these handy dandy. There's 8 of them, 9 of them. There's 8, and then there's one where it's where he was the steady main writer stories. They're a lot of fun, and yeah, if you like the Fantastic Four, I think you'll enjoy them.
Bobby Nash talked about the John Byrne run of Fantastic Four. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.